Good day, everyone. I am Christine, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone to today's webinar, I-9 Audits Strengthening Your Immigration Compliance Strategies in 2025. I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Diane L.D. Diane L.D., President and founder of Advantage HR Consulting, LLC, is a senior human resources professional with over 30 years of experience in the HR arena. Diane holds a master's certificate in human resources from Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations and has attained SPHR, SDEI, SCBC, and SHRM SCB certifications. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I want to welcome and thank our participants for joining us today. Today's webinar addresses ways your organization's immigration compliance strategies can be strengthened when you're completing the I-9 process with your new hires. What's more, if your I-9s are completed incorrectly, even slightly incorrectly, your organization is on the hook for some seriously severe penalties. So the bottom line is you need to complete your I-9s with care. So this is really a very timely topic when it comes to I-9 compliance. So Form I-9, simple piece of paperwork that's used to record that the employer has verified its new hire's identity and eligibility to work in the U.S. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So what is Form I-9? Who needs to comply? Well, it's a U.S. Citizens and Immigration Services form. It was established into law under the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. I-9s are used to verify a new hire's or a current employee's identity and establish a worker's eligibility to accept employment in the U.S. What agency is responsible for I-9 enforcement? Well, it falls to the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Group, otherwise known as ICE. You're being compliant with all the I-9 regulations is to develop I-9 administrative practices. With respect to risk management, these practices can help mitigate the risk of hiring unauthorized workers, which can then lead to legal issues and damage to the organization's reputation. Here is an example of an administrative memorandum. I mentioned that there is a new I-9 form. It was released August 1st, 2023. So what kind of changes came about with this new form? Well, sections 1 and 2 were compressed into a single-sided sheet. I also want to make you aware of an alternative process for reviewing documentation. This only applies to those who use E-Verify. So again, only for E-Verify users, Forms I-9, and our remote employees. There is no more relaxation of the rules for employers when completing I-9s with their remotely hired employees. ICE also has expanded the definition of authorized representative. So now let's talk about how we actually complete an I-9. You actually have two options. You can have your new hires complete Section 1 of Form I-9 on their first day of employment or before their actual date of hire, only if that individual has been offered the job and has accepted it. Section 1 of the form. Section 1 must be completed no later than the employee's first day of work for pay. Employers must also make sure that the fields in Section 1 are completed properly by the new hire. They must also provide their date of birth. Something else to keep in mind. This is just a screenshot of those status boxes. So even though the bulk of the responsibilities fall to the employee in Section 1, the employer is not off the hook. It is their responsibility to review the information provided by the employee in Section 1, ensuring all information has been provided. This slide lists some common errors found in Section 1. It must be completed by the preparer and/or translator. Some common errors you might find in Supplement A. So Section 2 deals with the employer's review and attestation. In Section 2, there are 2 fields that require dates. And again, even though the bulk of the responsibilities for Section 2 falls on the employee has a few responsibilities. Common errors you might find in Section 2. And again, not an exhaustive list. Why are those acceptable documents organized into 3 lists? So when you're recording the document information in Section 2, enter the document's title, the issuing authority. When you're examining the documentation, you must physically examine the documents in the presence of the employee. I also want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of keeping copies of the employee's documentation. So some advantages, some disadvantages. Keep in mind, you're not required to keep photocopies of the documents. So moving on to Supplement B, which was formerly Section 3 of the old I-9 form. This is where an employer would update an employee's legal name change. So these next set of slides explores when you should update an I-9 as well as when you must re-verify an employee's work authorization. So re-verification, which takes place via Supplement B, is the most common reason for completing Supplement B. Never re-verify a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen national. Remind those employees at least 90 days in advance of work authorization expiration. You would also make use of Supplement B for rehires. Look to see if that employee is still authorized to work in the U.S. You're not obligated to update I-9s in cases of name changes. Common errors you'll find in Supplement B. If it neglects to enter the date of rehire, if that's applicable. General tips for completing I-9s. There are some exceptions for completion of I-9s. With respect to mergers and acquisitions, and throughout the process, we obviously want to avoid the risk of discrimination. You must not demand the employee show you specific documents. Retention guidelines. I-9s have to be kept on file for all active employees who were hired on or after November 7th, 1986. Let's talk about audits. So those external audits, internal audits. This is the best way to ensure that should you be audited by ICE when you're making corrections, another best practice is to include, a memorandum of correction. There are 2 types of errors. You could be more serious errors, substantive errors, not completing an I-9 at all. They will notify the employer in writing of the results. Let's talk about E-Verify. Please note it is not a substitute or considered an electronic version of the I-9. Currently, E-Verify has over 1 million employers enrolled. There are some requirements to be aware of. The employer must still complete an I-9 for all new hires regarding employers participating in mandatory E-Verify fraud training. So once you've created the case, the system will return one of several results, what is called E-Verify Next Gen. The little bit of information I have about E-Verify Next Gen, it'll be an integrated system. So when it is rolled out, whenever that may be, steps to prepare, stay informed. The steps that will need to be taken, ensure all your employment records are properly maintained. Please know the government means business when it comes to I-9 compliance. Careful hiring is only part of the answer. Be familiar with those 3 lists of acceptable documents. And again, going electronic can pay off. And I want to thank our participants for joining us today. I hope you found the presentation to be informative and helpful.
Thank you, Diane. That concludes the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.